Hello all. Thank you for stopping by ETM Design and Productions channel. Thanks for being here. This is my first full-length video, so you have to bear with me. I'm a little new at this. You may hear the train in the background. I do apologize about that. Yeah, so thanks for being here. This is ETM Design Productions. I said this is my first full-length video. So this is an IYV guitar I've had for probably about a year now. I've done some mods to it previously, but I'm always tinkering around with my guitars and my various instruments and trying to either improve on them or try something a little different. In this case, I just wanted to try something a little different. The guitar previously had a push-pull pot in it with the coil split, where the tone knob is the push-pull and it would coil split both pickups at the same time. And I wanted to kind of split that up, and I recently just did an Ibanez Geo for my girlfriend's son, and I put in a couple of the on-off switches and got a new set of pickups for his Ibanez, and I like the way it looked. It kind of had that mean, dirty look, and this IYV, it's kind of a PRS copy of an SC dual humbucker. So yeah, I wanted to transfer the dual switches over to one of my guitars and try it out. I've put a couple of these switches in other guitars when I was doing kind of the David Gilmour mod on a couple Strats, just kind of make all the pickups active at the same time. So in this case, in this application, I'm going to be wiring in basically two on-off switches, one for each humbucker, coil splitting them. And this is me fighting with, I have a dry weld on top of one of the pots, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I was fighting with it and fighting with it and fighting with it, and I just could not get the solder hot enough to actually melt to where I could disconnect it. So as you can see, I kind of gave up, and now here I am taking a different approach. I'm just going to take the pots out completely. It'll be easier then to get whatever wires off that pot I need. And I end up going a different route anyways. I believe, not even using that pot. I just go ahead and start fresh with three, short-stemmed, brand new CTS 500K potentiometers. And yeah, this is kind of me going through it. I have all my parts there. I got the switch out. After I got everything out and I'm looking at it, I noticed, well, I'm going to be putting in an additional potentiometer because I'm going with volume tone. So that way I can control each humbucker's volume independently. I can put on the gas or take off the gas depending on, what sound I'm going for. And I realized that the inside of the guitar and the way it was routed in the cavity for all the electronics, they just went deeper around where the pots were, so I had to kind of chisel that out. I was looking at that and kind of planning for the future as I go through this. So here I am, obviously taping up the guitar. I don't want to chip out the finish. I'm drawing lines from each end of the pot just to kind of get the space, the void between. So once I measure out my halfway point, I also have, a center point of reference. So that way all the pots and all the switches are completely aligned. Looks nice and clean and professional. So here I am, pretty much wrapping up my measurements. Kind of checking, referencing with the switches. Make my first pilot holes. So after I make my first pilot holes, I take the tape off. Um, I've had a couple people say, "Why are you doing that? Just go ahead and keep going. The tape's already on there." I pull it off because I like to look at the finish. I want to make sure that there's not a lot of chip out. Um, now while the hole is small, if there was a lot of chip out or something was happening, it's a good time to check that and course correct if something were to be happening underneath the tape. But everything ended up turning out great. Reapplied the tape, um, step by step, going up each time, getting bigger and bigger. And with a round file, just going in there and filing out the insides of the holes, smoothing them out where there's no snags when I go to put the potentiometer and the switches in. Also, I have a little tube of flat black automotive, like touch-up paint. I like to fill in the holes that I drill. It just makes them look like, they've been there. And here I am measuring out and drilling kind of the pilot holes for the lock on the on-off switches. They have kind of like a key on the washer to stop the switches from spinning and turning. So yeah, I'm drilling the pilot holes, filing them out, and then here I am filling them and painting them with the touch-up paint. You notice there's a little bit of paint that got on the finish, so I'm going to grab a Q-tip with a little bit of 91% rubbing alcohol. So yeah, just cleaning it up a little bit. Attention to detail, right? I do. This is my guitar, but if I was working on someone else's guitar, I'd probably keep a neater workspace, and I wouldn't be as aggressive as I'm being with this guitar. This is my guitar, so I don't really have a whole lot of reasons. And I flip the guitar and put it down on top of the wood shavings and stuff like that. I wouldn't do that with a client guitar, but because this is my guitar, I don't really care. So here I am drilling out cavity. I moved put a little bit more padding down because I'm going to be pushing pretty aggressively down on the back side of the guitar, and since it's still strung up and everything, I don't want to damage it. Here I am with some really sharp chisels, just kind of chiseling away, the back section of the electronics cavity where they didn't route down as deep as they did, where potentiometers that came factory from the guitar are. So I have to kind of clean up the space in between each pot, so that way the third pot will fit. I had a couple long stem pots that I could have just, set the nut and the washers on a long stem and called it a day and not had to do all this. But I'm going ahead and drilling a hole in a guitar. It's a permanent thing, so I might as well finish it up and make it look finished, and make it look like it was truly intentional from the factory. So after I'm done chiseling, I will go in there with some paint and touch it up. And looking at this paint, I don't think the paint was conductive paint. I think it was just flat black paint. It was not thick at all. There's humbuckers in these guitars. Doesn't really need the shielding paint. Not when you're dealing with humbuckers. With the coil splitting, it may be beneficial, but I'm not too worried about it. Not by any means professional musician. I don't go on tour. I'm not, playing on a stage or in a venue and stuff like that. I'm just here in my home, play at my leisure just because I enjoy it. So I don't really have to worry about too much interference where, the guitar has to be shielded. And if this was a client guitar, I probably would have used shielding paint when I'm all done. But yeah, um, I'm not really looking to put that much time into it. Shielding paint, you want to apply it in, several layers, and you want to allow adequate, drying time between. It's not what I was going for here. So you see me walk away briefly. I took the guitar over the garbage can and dumped all the pieces that I chiseled out for the spaces in between where the pot and the pots and the switch were screwed into the guitar. Here I am, painting what I just chiseled so that way, it looks seamless. Like I said, I don't think that the paint that was in it was shielding paint. If it was such a thin layer. And it's funny because this is automotive touch-up paint, and when I'm done, you can't even tell that I use different paint. It looks exactly like the paint that they used in the guitar in the factory. So I turn it on its side because I'm getting into an area. It's kind of hard to see, so yeah, I turn it on its side so I can get in there with a little paintbrush applicator and the touch-up paint. There it is done. Yeah, it was wet, which is why it looks so dark, but it wasn't that dark. When it dries flat, and it looks just like the rest of the paint. So here I am getting some solder off of the push-pull pot. I'm gonna eventually reuse this pot. It's actually a Bandworks 500K pot that I had soldered a couple, resistors to for the coil split. Now here I am again fighting with that, dry weld, just trying to get the wires off of the pot. It's frustrating. It's our old cat Panda Bear, Miss Panda Bear. So I ended up finally getting the wires off, and then I ended up not even using the pot. And I didn't even use the wires that I took off the pot. So I kind of struggled with it. I guess not for nothing, because that pot that I took the wires off of that I was struggling with, it is a CTS 500K. So I will also reuse that pot as well. It had an aluminum shaft instead of the brass shaft. I do prefer the brass shafts over the aluminum shafts. A lot of people use the aluminum because they're lighter, but I just think the brass is just a much better conductor, a much better tone out of the brass pot than you do out of an aluminum one. The verdict's still out on that. Some would argue with me. Some might say that that's not true, but that's just what I found. Yeah, they are lighter, but the tone just isn't there. Not like on a brass shaft pot. And all my CTS pots are Art of Tone. My push pull are Bandworks. They sound the best. They have the best tone. I've tried other like Hashi and got a few discount or affordable pots, and it was kind of a mistake. You see me drinking my Ryze mushroom coffee. Not a sponsor, but maybe one day. I'm getting some braided ground wire together. I like to use the braided ground wire. I'll pull back the wiring, I'll fray it, and then trim the sheath on the inside, the cloth sheath on the inside, and then I'll twist the exterior braiding around the hole on the inside, and I'll solder it. Make it one conducive ground wire. And it's something typically I use when I'm wiring up Les Paul. 4 pots, I will go all the way around all 4 pots of the ground with this type of wiring. You'll see that I'm going to kind of do it in the same fashion. I'm going to solder the wire directly to the pots. So yeah, I'm just going through it, the braiding. Start soldering them up. So here I am, hitting them up with a little bit of sandpaper, rough up the top and the sides. Helps to kind of accept the solder. I'm looking at a wiring diagram on my phone just as a point of reference. The volume tone is not a typical wiring schematic that I do all the time. I do have I should say, built kind of a Kurt Cobain Jaguar. Only I don't have the Damasio pickups in it. I have some Seymour Duncans that I had in an old guitar that I transferred over. Had a Screaming Demon in the bridge, and then the Jazzmaster in the neck. It turned out really, really great. Instead of the out of phase, I chose to the top switch, like what Kurt had in his guitar. I chose to make it a coil split, so I can flip the switch and still kind of have the Jaguar type sound and tone. Then flip it again and kind of have the dirty, muddy, guitar that Kurt had. I am happy with the Seymour Duncan pickups. I mean, I know they're not Damasio pickups. Some would argue one's better than the other. I will say that the Seymour Duncans that are in there are probably 15, almost 20 years old. So, those you know anything about quality, the newer stuff just doesn't sound the same as the old stuff. So here I am. I'm wiring in a couple volume bleeds. I built these volume bleeds. I forget what the resistor is. I forget exactly what the temperature and the voltage rating is. But the capacitor is 0.01 UF, basically mini orange drop. I think it's rated to 400 volts. So yeah, I took the cap and got the resistor and spun it around and soldered them. So here I'm actually checking. I forgot which pickup was which, so I was just taking a peek in there. I know typically the bridge pickup wire is black, and the neck is typically colored. So in this case, in this guitar, the neck was gray. The bridge was black, but I was just confirming it. Took a minute to just pull it up to kind of mark it in my mind that the black wire is for the bridge when I go to start wiring everything into the guitar here in a minute. And that the orange drop that's on the tone, that orange drop is 0.022. If anyone's wondering. So yeah, I'm gonna start to fight with getting the ground wire on the sides of the pot. So I do typically start in the middle, or if it was a Les Paul style, I'll start on the back tone and come up around forward. So that way I can solder into the body, be close to the switch so that way I can take the other ground back to the jack. Which is kind of the way I've always done it. Some would say, the ground isn't that important, but I truly believe it does affect the tone. And there's different ways that I've done it, and I found that doing the ground this way, great tone. I've done it other ways, and it does seem to just interfere. Yeah, spinning around the other volume. I'll typically solder it in two places. I'll solder it on the top and put kind of like a nice thick bead of solder on the top, and then I'll, once in the guitar, I'll connect the ground wire for the pickup there, the ground wire from the bridge there, and then I'll also solder it on the side. Yeah, here I am continuing. So here I am pulling out the little on-off switches, the micro or mini switches. I'll sand down the ends just again so they accept the solder a little bit better. Now here I actually make a mistake. I end up soldering the resistor into the center pole, and really that's where I should have soldered the two combined north and south pole wires from the humbucker, and then in the far outside lead, that's where I should have wired the resistor and then soldered that to a ground. So of course I don't figure that out until I get everything together, and I'm sitting there playing and wondering why I'm in single coil mode and I can't get the humbuckers to come back. So I end up taking it apart again. I didn't record that. I didn't take everything apart. I just unsoldered, the resistors from the switch and moved the leads from the humbuckers for the split. And then I ended up going with a heavier duty resistor, and then also pulling a better ground, because I was getting a little bit of interference, and my suspicions were right. After I figured that out, the interference was coming from the ground off of the switches. So yeah, I just did a better ground direct where I tie it into the bridge on the main volume pot, and that took care of it. The buzzing in single coil mode went away, so no longer does that. Yeah, I try to do as much as I can on the bench. Soldering iron's hot, and I got big fingers, so trying to move around inside a little cavity. I'm not my soldering skills aren't the best. I'm still learning and still getting better. I think I do all right. Not to toot my own horn, but I've seen a lot of messy solder work, and mine in the beginning was bad too. So the more you solder, the better you get. And tinning my ends, always got to tin the ends. So yeah, just going through it, doing as much as I can out of the guitar before I go to start installing everything, which I will. Continuing to get the pots installed, the switch installed and everything. Sorry, I kind of pulled the guitar out of camera view. I'm actually just recording this with my cell phone. I am kind of new at the whole YouTube world and everything. I do have an Instagram page. I'll post it down below, as they say in the YouTube world. Yeah, I have a lot of photos and pictures of my various guitars and projects over on Instagram. Shared some of the content of this mod on Instagram. You can actually find the original photos of this guitar before I did this mod. So I don't really have any to provide in this video. It's not really what I'm going for. It's more or less the end product. Like I said, I want this mod to look as close to factory as possible. It was something that was custom built for someone. So here I am continuing to fight with getting them in and getting them seated properly. The extra volume knob was giving me a little bit of a hard time. And then the second switch gave me a hard time as well. There's just a couple high spots, and I didn't feel like taking everything out and going at it with the chisels and the paint again. Was able to kind of force it down and push it down hard enough to where I got the nut to just grab and tighten, and it turned out all right. It worked. It worked good. So everything's in, two switches, three-way switch, and then 3 pots. We'll be moving here to the pickups and everything wired in. Well, all, that's my video. If you made it to the end, greatly appreciate you.